Well, welcome everybody to the second in the series of strategic storytelling by myself, Big Chief Talking Bull. Now, in the first in the series, I mentioned how important it was in strategic storytelling, unlike other forms of storytelling, which might be purely for entertainment purposes, that the strategic storyteller has a particular message, a particular purpose to the stories which he is telling. And I promise to share with you an example from my own experience as a business storyteller, helping business leaders to communicate more persuasively, more effectively using storytelling. Now, about a decade back, I was asked to help a CEO of a large banking entity in Johannesburg. I was referred to him by a fairly well-known business coach. And when I met Stephen, the CEO, the first time, I was surprised because the first thing he said to me was that he didn't ever expect to have been a CEO. He felt he was an excellent deal maker, but he didn't think that he was a leader of any great substance. And I thought that that was quite rare, that he would have the lack of hubris which often goes along with people who occupy these very rarefied, elevated levels in organizational life. The second thing that Stephen said to me was that he was not a good communicator. He was intimidated by public speaking and making presentations, and people generally within the organization said, "Stephen, whatever you do, don't communicate." Now, of course, that's absolutely impossible as a business leader to think that you could actually lead effectively without communicating. And so he enlisted the services of myself to help him to communicate more confidently and more persuasively in his presentations. Now, he was lining up to do what we call an imbizo in South Africa. That's a roadshow. You'll be familiar with these, where the business leader, the CEO, the managing director goes to all the operations and communicates something important that everybody needs to know about where the company is going. And so the first thing I asked him was, well, what is it that you want to communicate fundamentally? What's the most important thing? And Stephen said, well, the transformation. He wants to instill a sense of enthusiasm and passion towards transformation. Now, this came as no surprise. Transformation has been one of the biggest strategic agenda items since the advent of democracy in South Africa, at the time probably about 15 years in duration. And so I said, well, let's look at your life story, Stephen, and see if there's anything that pops up in your experience where transformation has affected you either positively or negatively, or the need for transformation may have arisen. And he shared with me, as part of his life story over a couple of sessions, one anecdote which occurred to him fairly early on in his young adult life, where despite the fact that he had a thoroughly Afrikaans name, he had a thoroughly English background. So his surname was Afrikaans, but he had been brought up in an English-speaking family. The lingua franca was English, but he went off to an Afrikaans university to study for his chartered accountancy qualification, and failed his first year as a result of writing the same course twice, not knowing that it was the same course. So he was so disempowered by his lack of Afrikaans faculty that he wrote the same course twice and failed a year. And I said to him, well, that sounds a little bit to me like what might happen inside your organization, where many of the people who work at the bank are not English first language speakers. They have other languages that they've been brought up with. And of course, they are immediately disempowered in organizational life. If you think about your voice, that's the seat of your power as a leader. All your power comes from your ability to communicate eloquently, effectively, persuasively, and so forth. And if you can't do that, immediately you're on the back foot. And so what Stephen did is he shared this anecdote as part of these imbizos, the roadshows that he went on. The following year, Stephen's agenda item strategically was a little different. This time it was into Africa. A large multinational bank had bought the South African operations of also a large South African bank, and they had a footprint in Africa. And Stephen said that he was facing a lot of Afro-pessimism. There is that in South Africa, perhaps not quite as much now as there was in the past, but whereby people didn't think that there was much money to be made in Africa. People didn't see South Africa as part of Africa, and he wanted to again instill a sense of enthusiasm towards working in Africa. So this time I said, well, let's not look so much at your life story. Those are the easier stories to tell. Did you know about the allegorical story about the British shoe company that did some research in Africa around and about the end of the 19th century. And Stephen said, no. So I said, well, there was a British shoe company that sent a salesman to West Africa and another salesman to East Africa to establish the size of the shoe market in Africa. And about 6 months passed where the salespeople did their research and then came back to the London operations, and the one from West Africa reported back that there was no market for shoes in Africa. Nobody wears them. The one from East Africa came back and said there's a huge market for shoes in Africa. Nobody wears them. Now, of course, this is just another of those glass half full, glass half empty stories. But Stephen told it as part of his roadshows, and when I went back the following year, he said, the amazing thing is, Pete, is that people will stop me in the corridor, or maybe I'll meet somebody in a lift or in one of the branches, and they'll say, Stephen, there's a huge market for shoes in Africa. Now the years passed, and probably about a year or two ago, this is 8 years after I originally worked with Stephen, I was running a workshop for business executives at a different company, this time a very big life insurance company. It was a storytelling skills workshop, and during the workshop, the proceedings, with me not having mentioned these anecdotes about Stephen that I've shared with you now, one of the participants said, I used to work for an organization and we had a CEO called Stephen, and I remember when he used to go on his roadshows, on his imbizos, he would tell stories, and I still remember one. It's about a British shoe company. So this just goes to illustrate the power of storytelling, to reach into far places, to be a fairly universal form of communication. And I want you just to think about that as a business storyteller, the first thing you think about is what message do I want to communicate. Then look for stories from your own experience, because these are the easiest to tell. And then challenge yourself as you get more experienced and more confident, and look at more symbolic stories like the British Shoe Company. And these will help you tremendously in communicating messages which are well remembered. Thank you very much.